1913. Double handles were used on all Fokker aircraft from 1913 onwards. This meant that there was a handle for each hand. The first control handle of this design was used on the Fokker M5, which was designed as a sports aircraft before the war. Photos show the aircraft with this handle without wooden handles yet. It's not clear whether this was left as it was or whether the photos was taken before the wooden pieces were attached. At the upper end of the handle was a plate that carried a so-called blip switch. The blip switch was used to interrupt the ignition in rotary engines when less RPM was required than the engine was capable of delivering at idle. Weight of this grip was 340 grams. 1914. Even before the outbreak of war in August 1914, the double handle designed in this way was fitted with the wooden handles and became standard at Fokker. The blip switch was now moved into a tube welded to the center of the rear semicircular tube of the basic frame and the front plate being removed. The wire was routed through the hole in the frame to the rear, where it was secured with a sheet metal clamp. The control stick in this form was also used after the outbreak of the war for the first unarmed Fokker monoplanes. Since the aircraft were intended for civil use first, the handles were initially nickel-plated. Later, they were increasingly painted. Aircraft equipped with this feature included the early Fokker A1, A2, B1 and B2. Weight of this grip was 440 grams. 1915. After Fokker equipped his monoplanes with control mechanisms for firing through the revolving propeller arc, the so-called Fokker Stangensteuerung, the handles were fitted with pushers for the thumb that allowed the pilot to operate a coupling between the gun and the engine, enabling the engine to fire the weapon at a predetermined moment. The previously simple handle was fitted with a bearing bush on the housing of the throttle switch or the blip switch, which accommodated the axis of rotation of a lever. A plate for the thumb was attached at the lower end of the lever arm, and the drive plate for the Bowden cable was attached to the upper end. The cable ran through an embutment at the upper end of the base frame and from there to the clutch. The weight was 500 grams. The front frame of these handles was then changed from rectangular to round, which resulted in a weight reduction. The handle now weighed only 486 grams. Further weight savings were achieved by reducing the diameter of the front ring from 13 mm to 10 mm and changing the neck piece from a flattened tube to a cone rolled from sheet metal. This meant that the handle now weighed only 440 grams. The idea was then conceived to change the wooden handles from a cylindrical shape to an oval shape, which resulted in further weight savings and meant that the handle now weighed only 395 grams. 1916. With the introduction of the more powerful Ober-Ursel U3 double-row 14-cylinder rotary engine, Fokker attempted to increase the firepower and armament from just one machine gun to 3. This required a triple trigger on the handle, as 3 control mechanisms and couplings were also necessary. For this experiment, a handle from the first generation of armed aircraft was modified accordingly. It turned out that 3 machine guns did not work properly, so they went back to 2. Separate double triggers were experimented with this purpose. To do this, the triple trigger of this handle was simply cut and slit open in the middle. The construction weighed about 540 grams. Therefore, the final version of the second generation handles was equipped with 2 triggers made from 1.5 mm steel sheet, which reduced the weight back to 440 grams. 1917. In 1917, the German Army Air Force Inspectorate issued a decree that all fighter planes offered for sale to the military from then on had to have a throttle lever for the left hand on the control stick itself. Fokker complied with a new requirement while the triplane was being tested as the F-1. The first aircraft of this type did not yet have a throttle lever, but instead had a simple double handle with 2 push buttons as known from the D3. To meet the requirement, this handle was modified by cutting open the round front ring and fitting the throttle lever to its open left end. Unfortunately, this increased the weight to 580 grams. Richthofen and other pilots did not like the thumb pusher and asked Fokker if it would be possible to design a trigger similar to that of a rifle that allowed activating the gun by pulling the fingers towards the grip. Fokker considered this and initially came up with an interim solution for the handles of the triplane that were under construction. To this end, the handle was fitted with a structure on the rear side and a trigger guard, which pulled both triggers via cables. It is clear that this was not a satisfactory solution, and it also increased the weight to 660 grams. Fokker worked on a solution. Richthofen was in contact with Fokker and had the handle of his Fokker triplane 425-17 modified at the front according to his wishes. The handles were placed at an angle and the throttle lever was rotated by 180 degrees during installation. The blip switch was moved up to the frame, where it was easier to reach with the thumb and could not be accidentally operated when firing the guns. This modification weighed 760 grams. 1918. The fact that Richthofen discussed the changes with Fokker before he was shot down can be seen in the following two handle designs, which took these issues into account. The first improvement was incorporated into the production triplanes and was thus installed in the last triplanes, all D6 and all D8s. Even the first D7s still had this handle. Here, the superfluous structure at the rear was removed. The basic frame was simplified and the trigger levers were arranged so that they could be pulled with the fingers. The blip switch was moved to the top of the frame, as in Richthofen's field modification. This new handle weighed 550 grams. The last handle did not meet Richthofen's request to angle the main handles for a more comfortable grip. Fokker complied with this request with the final version by completely straightening the basic frame, ergonomically shaping the main handle, and designing the throttle lever so that it was easier to grip using two handles. The new handle weighed 680 grams. However, the wooden handles on the throttle lever of this handle were too long and collided with the instrument panel on the D7. In the series version, they were shortened from 100 mm to 70 mm in length, which also resulted in a weight reduction to 650 grams. In the end, a version of the handle with only one machine gun trigger and only one handle on the throttle lever was built for the Fokker C1. This weighed only 510 grams. The Inspectorate of the German Army Air Service was so impressed by this new grip design that they decided to make this the standard grip for all German fighter planes subsequently. This is why late in the war you can see occasionally other companies' airplanes equipped with this grip too, such as the Roland D6 for instance, among others. If you want to know more details about the grip development and evolution, I suggest to get a copy of our book Alles fest im Griff, or Everything Under Control, that is published in our series of in detail books. Get your copy either for free on our website or go to our Patreon page if you want to support the museum and buy your copy there. The link to the free download is provided at the Patreon page also. The free copy initially is meant for those who cannot afford to buy books and still want to get the information, such as younger people. So if you can, purchase. If not, feel free to download the free copy.